Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Today we're here to talk about a webinar on the Zenfi Automation Stories series. Today we'll be talking about how to automate sales quote generation and approval using the Zenfi platform. My name is Steve Heaney. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Zenfi, and I've spent much of my professional career working on low-code, no-code business automation softwares, predominantly in the Microsoft space. I'm really excited now to be part of the Zenfi team, and we're bringing these technologies and these capabilities to the Google ecosystem. On today's call, I also have our CEO, Vahid Taslimi. He's acting as our co-host today on the session. He'll be helping to moderate. Just a couple of housekeeping things. We are recording this session. If you do have any questions, we will have time for questions at the end. However, please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom meeting. So just a quick recap before we get into the building of the flow. What is Zenfi? So basically, Zenfi is a no-code automation platform that's been designed specifically for Google Workspace. It has seamless integration with all of the Google Workspace apps like Docs, Sheets, Google Forms, the Google Directory, as well as offering integration with very common line of business systems that you might like to use as well. For example, CRM systems or integration with digital signature platforms. Being built for Google and running in the Google Cloud, Zenfi offers the richest integration with Google you can expect to see. We have data centers in Australia, the United States and Europe, and we're bringing more online later this year. Using Zenfi, it really is very straightforward to automate your business processes. Just simply dragging and dropping the appropriate actions from the toolbox onto the Zenfi design canvas. You can use it to automate pretty much all of your internal business processes, whether it's leave requests, expense approvals, generating sales quotes, which we'll be doing today, HR onboarding, you name it. What we like to say is if you can represent your process as a flowchart, if you can draw it out on a whiteboard, then chances are you'll be able to automate that process using Zenfi. So just like every organization, here at Zenfi, we have a lot of internal processes that we use to run our business. And wherever possible, we try and automate these processes using the Zenfi platform. Today, I'm going to take you through how we went about automating our own sales quote generation and review process and acceptance by the customer using Zenfi. Prior to having this automated process in place, it was very much a manual process. And the way it would work is whenever a sales rep had to issue a quote to a customer, they basically found the last quote that they generated for a customer. They'd open it up in Docs, they'd save it as a new file name, they'd go through and update the customer details, the product details, save it as a PDF and send it across to the customer on email. Now, the problem with that process was that it was quite time consuming because they had to be sitting in front of a PC, they had to be able to look up the information, make sure they get it all right. It resulted in inconsistencies in our quoting because each sales rep had a slightly different variation of the template file saved in their drive that they were referring to. So when we needed to make changes to terms and conditions or pricing information, oftentimes that would be out of date. And finally, being a manual process, it was very error prone. Sometimes we'd have mistakes in the document, we'd forget to replace certain fields, and it resulted in some embarrassing errors in the quotes going out to customers. So the answer was to automate this. And how we went about doing it? Well, in Zenfi, what we needed to do was we needed to create a Google Docs template for the quote, and a template that Zenfi could understand and pick up and use as part of the process. The next step we had to do was create a Google form to capture the necessary information to go into the quote, and we use that to start the flow process. And finally, we use Zenfi and the flow designer to wire everything up and connect everything together. So without further ado, let's jump into this and I'll show you how we did this today, starting from scratch. So what I have here is my Google Drive, and I have a couple of files here that we're going to be using today. First of all, I have a quote. This is a quote. If I open it up, this is a quote that we sent out to another customer already, Skytrack Australia. And I'm going to turn this quote into a template so that I can use it as part of this quote generation process. So what I need to do here is I need to go through and update all of these, all of the bits of information that need to be replaced by Zenfi, and put in there these tokens. I'll put in quote number. In terms of the date the quote was prepared, so we'll call this quote date. You notice I'm putting in these curly braces. This is so that Zenfi recognizes this as a token that can be replaced at runtime. Quote expiry. We've got the customer name, contact name. You can see here I'm making everything here in this quote template generic, and this is going to all be replaced at runtime. And their email address, this will be their billing address. You notice here we have this, this table, and I'm actually going to show you how we go about replacing this entire table with some information from Google Sheets. So likewise, I'm just going to replace this with another token. I'll call it product details. And down the bottom here where we've got the acceptance, I'm going to put in here the contact name again. So you can repeat these tokens throughout the document, and Zenfi will replace all instances with the appropriate value at runtime. Okay, so now that I've pretty much done this, what I'm actually going to do is I'll make a copy, and I'll call this Zenfi quote template. Just checking over this, making sure I've got all of my fields in there. And that's looking pretty good as a quote template. So this will be the master template that I use to generate all of the quotes coming from Zenfi. The next step is I need to create a form to be able to capture information that's going to kickstart this process. This is what the sales reps will fill in when they're wanting to generate a new quote. So I'll do forms.view and open up a new Google form. Give it a title. And the information that I need to collect here, I'll start putting into these questions. So I'm going to need to know the company name of the customer. I will need to know the contact person. Their billing address. And I'll make this one a paragraph, so we have multiple lines there. I will need to know their email address. The currency. Now at Zenfi, we sell products in a few different currencies. So I'll put in here AUD, need to put in USD, euros, and pounds. We also have the product that they're interested in purchasing. So we'll have two key options here. We'll have the Essential Edition, and we'll also have the Professional Edition. And I'm going to need to know, when is this subscription going to start? I'll put in here the subscription start date as well. This will be a date field. Google's picked that up for me. Okay, so I think I'm collecting all of the information here that I need to be able to generate a quote. One thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on the option to collect the email address of the person who's submitting the form. So this will be my sales rep. Final stage here, I'll just move this into my webinar folder, keep it all together. And that's it. Now I have my start form and I'm ready now. I've got my quote template. I have the start form. Now I'm ready to start designing the Zenfi flow that's going to pull all this together. Just as I think of it, I'm just going to jump into this quote template, and I just remember I forgot to update turn that into the currency into a token as well. So I'll put that in there. I'll replace that at runtime. Okay, so now moving into Zenfi. So this is Zenfi for those of you who are not familiar. So once you sign up for an account, you'll be taken here and you're presented with the dashboard. And what I'm going to do here today is I'm going to create a new flow. When you create a flow, you you're presented with these different options of how the flow is going to start. We call these triggers. So you can have flows that start manually on demand. You can have scheduled flows that run, say, once a week. We have flows that can start when a new file is added to a Google Drive folder, or an email arrives into Gmail, or when a Google form new response comes through. And that's what I'm going to choose today. So I create my flow and it takes me into the design canvas. And the first thing I need to do is to configure the trigger. So this is going to wire up the Zenfi flow to that form that I just created. Whenever Zenfi needs to reach out and connect to different systems, you need to provide a connection. So I don't have one here at the moment, so I'm going to go ahead and create a connection to Google Forms. You have the option of making this connection shared or private. Basically, that just means whether this connection will be available to just yourself, or whether other people working inside the Zenfi tenant will also be able to share the connection. In this instance, I'll make this one a private one. I go through the authorization process. So Zenfi is asking access to these particular permissions in Google Drive to allow it to do these things with forms. So I'm going to allow that. Now my connection is made. The next step for me to do is to select the form that's going to start this process. So here I'll go into my webinar folder and I'll select that form that we just created. You can see what Zenfi does now is it goes in and interrogates that form to find out all of the different values and questions that have been asked, and gives you the answers that you'll be able to use in your flow. So we have company name, contact person, billing address, basically all of those questions that we put inside the form are now appearing here, and I can use these inside the flow. Okay, so I'm in the flow, the form's been submitted, I've got the values. What do I need to do? I need to be able to create a document based on template. So in my toolbox here, I scroll down to the Google Docs, and you'll see here there are a whole lot of different actions that I can perform on different Google Docs. And the one that I'm interested in today is I want to generate a new document based on a template. So I just drag that action on, click on settings, and once again, it's asking me to have a connection to Google Drive. This has picked up a shared connection. I'm actually going to create a new one. Once again, I'll authorize it. And you might wonder why I have to do this for each different type of action. And the reason is Zenfi only requests the bare minimum permissions it needs to perform each action. And that way it gives you more granular control over which connections are doing what as part of your flow. Now, the next thing I need to do is select my template file. So click on this drive picker, I come into my webinar, and I'm going to choose that template file that we created earlier. And you can see straight away what Zenfi has done is it's gone through my quote template and it's pulled out all of those tokens that we defined earlier. And these are all of the tokens that need replacement values, so that when it creates a document using this template, they're the values that are going to be substituted in. Now, it's asking for a destination folder where I want to store these files after they've been created. So I'm just going to jump back to my Google Drive, and I'm going to create a new folder called Generated Quotes. Jump back into Zenfi now, and I'll choose that destination folder. It's asked me what would I like to call these files. So in this case, I'll call it Zenfi quote, and I'll hyphen it, and I'll put in here the name of the company who the quote is for. So I click on this little insert reference token here, and it shows me all of the information inside of the flow that I have access to. So I go to the trigger, which is that Google form that's been submitted, and right here I can see company name, and I can actually use that to generate the name of this file, and that's what I'm going to do. I've got a few other options here. I could generate HTML and PDF if I wanted to at this stage, but I won't do that just yet. So now I need to go ahead and fill in all of these tokens for the new document. There are a couple of obvious ones here, like customer name. I can just select that directly from that form trigger, and I'll put in the company name, contact person. Likewise, I can just hook that up. Their email address. billing address. The quote date, that's something that we're going to need to work out. And I'll get to that in a sec. Currency we can put in as well, so we have that in the form. And product details is going to be coming from a Google Sheet, so that's a little bit more complicated as well. So let's focus on these two dates first. Zenfi has a number of operations that can be performed, or actions that can pull out useful information. One of those is to get the current date. So I'll drag on a current date and time action. It's asking me to configure it. What time zone would I like to put in? Just going to put in Melbourne, Sydney, Australia. And what I can also do here is put in a format string. So I'm actually going to format this date with day, month, year, because that's what I like to see. And that's going to give me access to the current date and time. And for the expiry date of this quote, at Zenfi, our quotes expire after 14 days. So I need to add 14 days to the current date time to give me my quote expiry date. I can drag on an add date time action, and I'll configure this guy. The base date will be the current date time that we just calculated. I'll grab the result of that, and I want to add 14 days to it. Likewise, I want to format the output of this to day, month, 4-digit year. And I'm going to call this one, let's double click to rename the action. I'll call this the expiry date. And I'll call this one the quote date. Now, if I go back into my generate document action, down here where I've got these dates, I can now grab the quote date and the formatted result and put that in there. And likewise with the expiry date, I can do the same. So the quote number is the next one. The quote number is a little bit complicated because each time a new quote is generated, we want to basically increment this number. Now, there are a few different ways that you can go about approaching this, but probably the easiest way to do it is to keep track of every quote that's generated in a Google Sheet. And then by looking at the row number of each quote that gets entered, we can actually use that as the quote number. So I'm going to jump into this Google Sheet that I have here that's called Price List. And this is the reference table that has all of the Zenfi pricing in it. I'm actually going to add a sheet here, and I'll call it, we'll call this one quote log. And I'll just put customer name and amount, and perhaps the quote date. You can add other fields here if you wanted to as well, but let's just start with those. Now, back in Zenfi, whenever we create a new quote, I'm going to add a row to that sheet. Fortunately, we've got a whole lot of actions inside of Google Sheets here that we can perform as well. So I want to add a row. So I'll just drag that in there on top. The Drive connection, I can reuse the one I created earlier. For the file, I will go ahead and select on that price list spreadsheet that I created. Price list. The sheet name, Zenfi will go ahead and automatically load those up for me. And there's quote log, the one that I just created. I can say that my sheet has a header and I can get it to load the columns for me. So it's saying, okay, if you want to add a row to this sheet, you need to provide values for these columns here. I'll put in the customer name, the amount, which we don't have yet. So let's pause that one. And the quote date, we do have the quote date, so I'll put that in. Okay, so when we add a row to the log, basically what we get out of this, if we have a look at the outputs, one of the outputs that we have is the row number of the inserted row. And I'm going to be using this as our quote number. However, I don't want our quotes to start at 1 because it's not going to look very good. I'm going to actually add 10,000 to those. So using a maths operation now, going back to my operations, I can add 10,000 to that row number. So the first number that I'm looking at is the row number that we just added in. I want to add, and the second number is 10,000. And I'm going to call this the quote number. Now in generating my document for the quote number, I can use that value that I've just created, result in, and now I have my quote number done. So the final section is this product details. And this is actually a table. So what I've done is inside of my price list sheet here, I have this quote table. This is the piece of information that I need to insert into that docs. But I first need to update it before I insert it and merge it into the quote document. You can see here that I've got the price list. I also need to go ahead and look up the appropriate product here and stick it into that quote table before I put it into my document. So let's go about doing that now. Once we've generated the document, what I'm going to do, so the document will be created, but it's still missing the product details table there. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and look up the price information for the product that's been selected. And the way I can do that is back in here in Google Sheets, I'm going to look up a row. It needs a connection. So I'll just quickly add a connection here. Now I'm looking up the pricing here. So I will go ahead and click onto that pricing spreadsheet again. Price list. And the sheet name that I'll be querying is the price list. Let's load the columns here. And I'm going to be searching through the base product column, which is this one here. And I'm going to be looking for annual, and then based on what the sales rep has put in for the product selection, it will either be essentials or professional. So I'll go ahead to my trigger. I will select the product type that they've requested and subscription on the end of this. And that is now going to go ahead and look up that row of information. And here are all the columns that are going to be retrieved. Now you can see here that's going to bring me back pricing for that particular product in USD, AUD, pounds, and euro. And I actually need to go ahead and now and look at what currency this quote was for and pick out the appropriate value. We can do that by using a switch by value operation. So drag this on. And what I'm doing here is I'm saying, depending on what was selected in the trigger, so what currency has been requested, we're going to follow a different branch. So we will have AUD, euros, pounds, and I'll make the default branch USD. So depending on which value was selected on the form when this flow was started, it's going to go down one of these paths. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use what's called a workflow variable to store the price that I'm interested in. So the way I'll do that is go to configuration, and I have this section here for variables. Variables are a way of storing information that are available globally across all actions in the entire flow. So I'll call one here called price. Save that there. And now depending on which branch we go down to, we need to set that price to the appropriate value. So now I'll use a set variable action. Drag that on here to the AUD. And what I'll be doing here is the variable I'll be setting is the price, and the value will come from that lookup row where we've looked up all the prices. And if it's AUD, I'm going to be using the AUD value here. And likewise for the other three currencies. Now to save me a little bit of configuration time, I can just copy and paste these actions as well. Of course, I'll need to make sure I select the right value when I do that. one is euros. This one is pounds. And finally, we have the US dollar pricing. Okay, so now we know what price it is that we're interested in. What we're actually going to do is we're going to go and update this quote table here with the relevant details. So back into Google Sheets, I will be using an update row. I'll drag that on. Got my connection already. Choose the file I'm going to be updating. And the sheet that I'm interested in updating this time is the quote table. And the row number will be the second row. You can say it has a header. We'll load these columns so we know what we're looking at. Okay, so in the product, I now can just put in the product that we looked up from the price list. Renewed, you can say this is annually. The start date will be our subscription start date from our trigger. Now the end date, if I have a look at that Google Sheet, the end date is actually automatically calculated as part of Sheets. So I don't need to provide a value here because Sheets is going to work that out for me. So I can just remove that column. And finally, the price, I will set that to the workflow variable that we set up earlier, where we looked up and set the price of the product. Okay, so now I've updated that table. Now I need to insert that table into my quote template. So the way we do that is we have an action here under Google Docs, which we call insert sheets table into the document. So I'll open this guy up. I need to give it a connection. Zenfi the access it needs. Okay, now the sheet, the source sheet where I'm finding this table that I want to insert, it's once again coming from that sheet where I've been putting everything in. The range selection mode, I can actually put in a named range here, or either A1 to Z notation, or I can say just all data in the entire sheet, and that's what I'm going to be doing in this case. And the sheet that I'm interested in getting the table from is the quote table. Now, the document that I'm going to be sticking this in, well, that's the document that we just created, using the generate document using template. So I'll go ahead here and select the file ID, and that's how this action is going to reference that particular document. And finally, it wants to know what's the token name that I'm going to be using. So remember in my Zenfi quote template, I had this token called product details. That's the place where I want to stick it. So I'll put in here product details. And in terms of the width of the columns, let's make it auto adjust so it fits nicely into my document. Okay, at this point, I am going to save and run this flow just to see how we're going. We should be able to create a quote in Google Docs and have it appear in that Google Drive. So I'll give this a name. I'll call it quote generation. And I will publish this flow. Okay, the flow has been published. So now it's time to test it. So I'll go back to my Google form and I will preview this form and fill out the details. Put in some fictitious details here. Billing address. For the email, I'm actually going to put in my own so we can see what happens here later on. Currency, I think I'll choose US dollars for this one. Product, we'll make it the professional edition. And the subscription start date, let's make it the start of next month. Okay, so I've submitted that form. And what will be happening now is if we go back to the Zenfi recent runs, I can see now that a new instance of my flow has kicked off. So submitting the form has triggered the flow to run. The flow is now executing. If I click on here, I can see all of the steps that the flow is performing. It's currently up to generate a document using template. I hit refresh. It's doing the lookup row. It's gone through my switch, set the price. Now it's insert the sheets into the document. And finally, the flow is now completed. So if I go back to my Google Drive and I go into generated quotes, I can see now I have a new file that Zenfi has created for Acme Inc. If I open it up, we can see that all the information has come through. I have the correct currency. I've got the professional subscription there. It's got my start date, my end date. Everything is ready to go there. I'm now ready to convert this into a PDF and send it off to the customer. So far, so good. Let's go back to Zenfi and keep going. So back into flows again. Oops. So at this point here, we have a Google Docs that's ready to go. Now, before we send this directly to the customer, our sales team like to review the quotes. Okay, now this could be a sales manager. We don't require that here at Zenfi, but if you want to send this off to a sales manager, you could. But what our sales reps like to do is they like to be able to view the quote that's being generated just to confirm all the details before we go ahead and send that out to the customer. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to assign a task. And I'm going to assign this task, I'll call it quote review. And the outcomes of this task will be send to customer or cancel quote. I could have more outcomes if I wanted, but they're the two options that the reviewer is going to have after they review the document. In terms of who we're going to assign this to, I'm going to assign it to the person who initiated the request to begin with. So this will be the sales rep. Subject, please review the quote for, and I'll just put in the company name here. Email body, please review below quote and respond to this task. Now, so they know what they're reviewing, what I'm actually going to go ahead and do here is for that document that got generated, I'm going to insert the view link into that email body so they can just click it from their email and see what's going on. Okay. So we've configured our task. They've got this sent to customer. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to look to see what the outcome of this task is. And I can do that by dragging on an if condition. And I'll configure this guy and I'll say, when the outcome of the task is equal to send to customer, it's going to follow down the true branch. Otherwise, it's going to go down the false branch. So if they selected the other option, which was cancel the quote, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup. And I'm going to delete the item from Google Drive, the quote that was generated. The file or folder, I'll just stick in here the file ID of the document that we generated earlier. So they cancel the quote, we're cleaning up and getting rid of it out of the drive. However, if they approve it, what we want to do is we want to convert this now into a PDF. So the way I do that is in Google Docs, we have this action called export document. I'll drag that on. Now the source file is going to be the file ID of the document that was generated, and it's giving me a suggestion that that's here. This is the one that I want to use. So I'll go ahead and use that. Where do I want to stick these PDF files that are created? I'll just go ahead and choose the generated quotes location. File name, call it Zenfi quote. Put the customer's name in there. And because this will be a PDF, put PDF on the end. Okay, so now we have a PDF file that we're ready to send to the customer. But this is Zenfi, so we don't want an email PDF where they have to open it up and sign the document and send it back to us. We've got access to integration with these digital signature platforms. So we've got access to Adobe Sign, DocuSign, and Anature eSign. And what we can do is actually straight from here, part of the process, kick off a digital signature request and get that so the customer to digitally, electronically sign this quote for us and return it to us. Now I'm going to use Anature Sign, so I'll just drag on this eSign documents action here. Click to configure it. Once again, you'll need to have a connection. Now I've already got a connection here, but if you didn't, you would need to know the API ID and the API key from Anature. DocuSign and Adobe are very similar. So once you sign up with those applications, you can get access to an API key and ID. You'll use that to create your connection. As I mentioned, I already have one here, and I'm going to be using it to connect to Anature. Now, the document that I'm interested in sending out to them is that exported document. So just show you here. So the exported document, it will be the actual document that was created, that PDF. I can give this envelope a name, Zenfi quote. And the message that I want to send to the recipients, please see the quote Zenfi and sign if you accept. Now, who's going to be signing this document? I can put in the person's name here because we collected that on the form. And finally, their email address, so it knows where to send this signing request to. They need to sign it. Now, what I can actually do here is, with these digital signature platforms, you can actually create placeholders in the PDF, and that will tell the digital signing platform where the signatures need to go. So what I can actually do here is, if I go back to the template that we created earlier, you can see here I have a place where I want someone to fill out and put a signature. What I can do there is actually just put in another token for signature. But if I just put it like that, that's going to come out in the PDF, and they're going to be able to see that curly braces signature. So a trick here is to put it in there, but then change the font color to white. So once the document is generated, they won't be able to see it, but the digital signing platform will be able to pick up on that token placeholder, and they'll know that's where they need to sign. Put that in there, that's where they need to sign. Contact name, email needs to sign, that all looks good. Okay, so now that the e-signing request has gone out, what we then want to do is determine whether they've actually signed it or not. So once again, I can just go here and drag on an if statement. Drag on our condition here. And the condition will be if the outcome of the digital signing is equal to signed, then what I want to do is I want to save the signed quote into a new folder in Google Drive. So what I'll do here is I'll go back to my Google Drive and I'll create a new folder here for signed quotes. Back into Zenfi, I want to save the signed file that I get back from Anature. Just drag on a save file action. The file that I want to sign, this will be the payload from the digital signature. My suggestions here has already picked it up. And the folder where I want to put this is in that folder I just created. Signed quotes. Okay, so now I have a process where we submit the form, we're going through, we're generating the document, we're inserting the necessary information from sheets, we're sending it off to our sales team to review it. If they're happy with it, to send to the customer. We then go ahead and export that document, turn it into a PDF, send it off to Anitra for digital signing. The customer will receive that. If they have signed it, then we will retrieve that signed file and we'll store it in Google Drive for future reference. So let's go ahead and publish it and test the flow. So what I'm going to do now is just go ahead and submit another response. We'll call this one Incredible Inc. Contact person, Cincinnati, billing address, let's put the same address in. Now the person's email address, I'm actually going to use my own so that I get these digital signing requests and you can see what the experience is. This time we'll go for euros, essentials, and I'll make the start date. So let's go for 1st of October. Okay, it's been submitted. Let's see what's going on with our flow. So go back here to recent runs and we can see now that version 2 of the flow is running. Click on this particular instance and we can see where it's up to. Generating the document, putting in all the relevant details. Okay, so it's got to the point now where it's assigned the task to the sales rep, which is in fact myself because I submitted it. So if I go to my Google Mail, I can see here I now have a task to be completed. So it's saying, please review the quote that's been generated. So I can click on this link here, bring it up. Incredible Inc. looks good. It's quote number 10,003 euros, essentials. Happy with all that. And what I'm going to do is go back here and I'm going to go, yep, that's good. Send it to the customer. Okay. So going back to the flow, let's see what's happening now. The task's been completed. It's gone to the if and said, yep, send it to the customer, exporting the document to a PDF. And now we've sent it off to Anitra for that digital signature. Back into my email now. You can see here, I've received the digital signing request. This is me as the customer. Please see the attached quote from Zenfi and sign if you accept. So click on Review Documents. Takes me to this quote file. I have the option here to add a signature. So I'll go ahead and do that. Finish signing, and I've now digitally signed this quote. Back to our flow. You can see what's happening. The flow's been, the digital signing request is completed. It's now gone through, saving the file as the last step, and this flow should be completed. Now, if I go to my Google Drive, I go to Sign Quotes, and here is the quote that's now come back from the customer from the digital signing. I open that up, and I can see here I now have the signed quote from the customer. It's all very good. So as a final step, the last thing that we do inside at Zenfi is that we go and update our CRM. Now, we use HubSpot. And we go through and we need to update the deal to say this deal has now been closed. So if I go back into my flow, go to the end of this. So after the customer's signed it, everything's good. I've saved the file off to Google Drive. As a last step, I want to go and load up or find the deal that's specific for this customer. And then I want to go and change that deal status to closed won. Now, the way I do that is I go down here and I find HubSpot. And I need to go ahead and find the particular records that I'm interested in. So I'll drag on this read records. Now it's asking for a HubSpot connection. I already have one, but I could go ahead and create a new connection there, and it's just authorizing in the same way. The type of object that I'm looking at is deals, and I'm searching for a deal that has primary contact email equal to our customer's email address. And fields I'm interested in returning the deal ID. Okay. Now this could return multiple deals. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a collect, because we're going to return a collection of deals. So what all I need to do is just get the first one, because that's the one that I'm interested in. So I can do an operation here, which is to query the collection. Drag that on, and the collection is the deals that we got back, and I'm interested in the first item out of that collection. I'll just call this deal. And finally, we need to update that deal. So back into HubSpot. We want to do an update record this time. Updating a deal. The object ID is the deal ID that we just found. And the fields I want to update is the deal stage. So that's the closed won. And I also want to add in the closed won reason. And here I'm just going to put a link to that signed PDF. So I'll put a view link there to that file that we saved earlier. And that's it. That's our flow completely finished, from completely automated from start to finish, going through even all the way through to updating HubSpot with the information that we've now closed this deal and it's been won. So it really is quite powerful, as you can see. The flow now, if you look at it, has got quite a few actions to it, but you saw how I built it up in stages, and it's just so easy to go back in as business requirements change. I can just go back into Zenfi, add in more steps as required. For instance, if I wanted to add another review process from a sales manager, it'd just be a matter of adding in that assigned task at the appropriate point and getting approval from the sales manager as well. Okay, so just to recap quickly, summary of everything you just saw. I know it's quite a lot to take in, but once you get familiar with Zenfi, you really can automate this stuff very, very quickly. So I used Google Docs and I created a template file that Zenfi could interpret. And that's my master quote template file. We used a Google form to start the process and collect all the information that we needed from the sales reps. We used Zenfi's document generation to create that new file in Google Docs. We used Sheets to both do some calculations for us, getting that quote number, as well as looking up the price information, merging the Google Sheets data back into that document that we created, and that was our products table in our quote. We then used an approval task to get the sales rep to review the quote, and if they were comfortable to go ahead, we then went along and converted that document into a PDF, sent it across to Anitra for a digital signature request to the customer, and finally, when we got that back, we updated HubSpot deal information to say that this has now been closed and we've won it. So quite a lot of flow to get through, but all done. And I will now open up to questions if anybody has any.
Steve, thank you very much. There's a few questions which have come in. I think you've answered the first one, but I'm going to ask. The question is that, can I get more approvals if required before sending it to a customer?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, you can just drag on as many as you like, wherever you like, as in the flow. And in addition to just having approvals, like review stages, you could also request to get more information as part of the flow as well. So we have another action that we call request data. And if you drag that onto the flow, you're able to design a form. So when the flow gets to that section or it gets to that action, it's actually going to pause. It's going to send an email to a user and say, please complete this form, fill out more information for us before the flow continues.
Thank you. And next one is, can I lock down the file so no further edit is allowed? I think the question is that around like sharing as a read-only file.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely we can. So if we have a look in, I believe it's in Google Drives here. Let me do a search for it. Share an item. So this share an item action here, what we can actually do is we can go ahead and as part of the flow, we can actually change permissions on the document. So when it moved from being generated to being, or after the sales rep had reviewed it and say we went on to a manager approval step, what we could actually do as part of the flow is demote that sales rep down to a reader only. We could open up write access to the sales manager for that step while we need to get their approval, and then we could update the permissions accordingly afterwards as well. So absolutely we can do that with a share item. It's very simple.
Okay, thank you. The next question is that, can I email the signed code as an attachment to other people in the organization?
Yeah, we didn't get onto emails, but yeah, sending emails absolutely is a big part of any process. And what I could do here is after I've saved the file, after I've got the file back from Anisha, what we could do is we could just do a send email and we drag that on. It's very simple. Once again, connection to Gmail. So this is the account it's going to send from. We can put in the subject, the body. We can use rich text in here as well. And if I wanted to, I could just add an attachment and I could do the content of the file that has come back. So that PDF file, I could easily send that off to say finance or something like that.
Next question. Can you create other types of document in Zenfi? I think the question must be around how you've shown we've created Google Docs. The question must be around other type of documents.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can create sheets, we can create slides, we can create slides from templates, we can generate slides. Pretty much all of the content that you can see in Google Workspace, we've got actions to manipulate and create that content.
Okay, I think the next question you've already answered. I think that's all the questions we have received.
All right, awesome. Well, guys, thank you very much for staying through to the end, and appreciate you taking the time to sit in on this webinar. We will make recordings of this session available in the coming days if you need to share it around for your colleagues and whatnot. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. You can reach me at steve@zenfi.com. Go to our website, sign up for a trial if you haven't already, and get started with Zenfit. It really is quite powerful and quite satisfying once you get to use it. Thank you.
Thank you.